So hello. I'll give you a couple of minutes. So hey, how are you, everyone? Those of you that are here, it's kind of impromptu, so I understand. I have no qualms about it. How are you, everyone? It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And again, Copa America just a couple of days away, couple of weeks away, as a matter of fact. And well, it's interesting to see how things have developed over the past couple of weeks when it comes to Colombia. Yeah, everyone's talking about Argentina, and they should. Of course, a team that has won the World Cup, a team that has won the final, a team that's won the last three trophies internationally that they've played. Well, there's very little argument as to who maybe even prohibited favorite could be to win the Copa America. So, all of that being said, today's a very important day for the Colombians. Of course, it is for the U.S. as well. But of course, you've heard it a lot in English media how the U.S. this, how the U.S. that. Well, for Colombia, it ends up being pivotal for them because there are, amidst all the optimism and all the good run of form, meanwhile, Colombia have been one of the few teams that have. I mean, the last time that Argentina lost in Copa America was to Colombia, or in group phase, I should say. They lost to Colombia, then of course they lost to Brazil in semis in that same Copa America. So one of the only teams that have beaten Argentina in the Lionel Scaloni era. It's a different Colombia side compared to the one that Argentina faced in qualifiers last time around. A very meek team, a very scared team, a very I hate to use the term, and I think I've only used it once when talking about a coach, and I hate to use it because it's a coach I respect a great deal in Reynaldo Rueda, but it was a cowardly coach in Reynaldo Rueda on that day when Colombia faced Argentina, basically knocking them out of World Cup qualifying. But under Nestor Lorenzo, it's a different side. It seems like it's a side that's a bit freer, a bit pacier, a bit quicker, willing and able to not only drop back and defend because their lines defensively end up being very sturdy, very solid. It's a team that can go out and transition very quickly on you, and they have the players to do it very quickly. Of course, when you have the playmakers in the middle, that quickness accelerates not because of their speed necessarily, but because of their quick decision making and understanding of where the ball has to go in certain situations and who it has to go to. That's what makes Colombia such a dangerous team in this Copa America. Because, as Argentina have seen, if there's a team that can transition well against Argentina, of course, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but just so you have an idea, if that scenario does come to fruition, I see it a bit difficult. I'll explain a little bit why. Because when Argentina have been hit hard and have been hit hardest, it's been against teams that can transition off the ball quickly. Although Argentina have been organized. Again, I don't want to make this in Argentina because it's not, but that is the bar at which Nestor Lorenzo is kind of raising it in order to have his team understand where they're going or where they're at or where they've progressed to leading up to World Cup qualifiers, and of course, eventually to hopefully what ends up being a return to the World Cup after the absence in Qatar. Of course, if you look at all their lines, and of course, as I say this, I'm bringing up the call-up because there's a couple of names that I wanted to mention. And I'll give you the pros and the cons. I'm not just going, Colombia's this marvelous team. There are some uncertainties when it comes to the Colombian national team in terms of this call-up. And I'll delve into that when, of course, the moment comes. There have been a lot of question marks. Colombia, for one, have criticized Nestor Lorenzo, have incessantly been criticizing Nestor Lorenzo despite being on a 21-match unbeaten streak. Now, keep in mind, Colombia have had those long unbeaten streaks in the past, and they lead to nothing. Of course, if long unbeaten streaks end up leading to trophies, that's a different story. Or getting you deep into tournaments. Let's say, getting deep into this Copa America, getting deep into the World Cup, getting deep into or qualifying with relative ease to no problem, then you end up kind of giving that number a bit of more credence. There's certain players that come into, I'll start with the negative first. Why not? There are certain players whose continuity is still up in the air. Players like Santiago Arias, who played at FC Cincinnati. He's starting to play over at Bahia some more, over in Brazil. He most likely will not be the starter over at right back. The starter will most likely be Daniel Munoz of Crystal Palace, who had a sensational second half. If there was a player over at Crystal Palace that truly benefited, of course, everyone's going to say Jean-Philippe Mateta and Ezequiel Eze, so on and so forth. Few will mention Daniel Munoz. Munoz really flourished under Oliver Glasner during the last half of the season in the Premier League. And that's one thing to be looking at when it comes to his progression with the national team. Of course, we saw him in the month of March show his full bloom as a right back and showing his skills and the potential that it once was and no longer it being potential anymore. So Daniel Munoz ends up being vital for Nestor Lorenzo at right back. Yes, there are uncertainties, like I said. Maybe the biggest ends up being a goalkeeper. David Ospina, obviously not going to be the starter. He played at Al Nassr, but was very erratic. No longer at Al Nassr, basically running out his contract as he will come back to Colombia to play for Atlético Nacional. Camilo Vargas was, well, basically the lifesaver for Atlas yet again during the last few semesters. Ends up being that, but he was not the best goalkeeper, the best Colombian goalkeeper out there. The best Colombian goalkeeper was Kevin Mier of Cruz Azul. He doesn't get a call-up by Nestor Lorenzo, and that really enraged the Colombian media. Why isn't Kevin Mier getting a call-up? Why isn't, I mean, Kevin Mier most likely will be the heir apparent to the goalkeeping spot in the national team, but just not now. Maybe in World Cup qualifying we'll see him. Maybe in the World Cup we will see him if his progression continues. There will come to a certain point where Nestor Lorenzo will no longer be able to ignore Kevin Mier. Now, I don't know if he's ignoring him or not, but for sure, he's omitted him. So that in and of itself says something. Defense, it's a solid defense. Now, how good can it be? It could be good. It's physical. It can be used as an option when you're attacking on set pieces. That's what makes Colombia so dangerous with their central defenders. Of course, we talk about Jerry Mina. Okay, whatever, defending. But going forward and being that option to head the ball makes it a very difficult task for anyone that's defending. Now, when you have skillful, pacier forwards that have good skill, that could cause problems for Colombia at times. It could. Daniel Munoz, I said, Santiago Arias, Carlos Cuesta, who's solid over at Genk. John Lucumi ends up being interesting over at Bologna. As I mentioned before, Jerry Mina. I don't know where we're going to get with Jerry Mina. He could score a goal and then, of course, let 2 or 3 in. Christian Borja over at Sporting Braga. Interesting as well. I mean, nothing spectacular in terms of solid, nothing spectacular. Yeah, okay. You look at the midfield, another player that truly emerged. Well, he was consistent with Roy Hodgson, and of course even more consistent with Oliver Glasner and Jefferson Lerma over at Crystal Palace. Richard Rios ends up being the interesting story in all of this. A guy who played futsal just a couple of years ago, now playing and being one of the starters, maybe probably being one of the best players in South American football over at Palmeiras over the last 6 months or so. So Richard, at one time I'm like, Richard Rios, who the hell is this guy? But then, of course, you start to see what he's been able to do for Palmeiras in the middle, and that ends up creating some interesting situations for Nestor Lorenzo. No longer is there a Mateus Uribe. There's been a bit of a change in terms of the passing of the guard when it comes to the holding midfielders in the Colombian national team. John Arias, great playmaker for Fluminense. Kevin Castaño over Krasnodar. Okay, yeah, it's all right. Jorge Carrascal has been doing great over at Dinamo Moscow. But then this is where things get interesting. When you start looking at players like Juanfer Quintero, who hasn't played a lot, who hasn't really played much at Racing and already decided to leave Racing Club in Avellaneda. James Rodriguez, biggest question mark on this team, bar none. Why? Because James hasn't played much at Sao Paulo. James has wanted out of Sao Paulo, like he wanted out at Olympiacos, like he wanted out over in Qatar, like he wanted out at Everton, like he wanted out at Bayern because it was too cold. He's 32 now. If there is one thing, okay, I'll switch. And you always say the same thing about James. Yeah, I do. Because it ends up being the same. When he came to Sao Paulo, I said, watch, he's not going to last a year at Sao Paulo, or he's not going to play consistently. And both of my words ended up being right. Either he didn't play well or he wasn't consistent. Well, he didn't play well at times and he wasn't consistent. Now, let's switch it a bit because it's not all about one side. If there has been an oasis for him, if there has been one bit of solace for him during this entire decade, it's been the Colombian national team. When he puts on the yellow jersey, it switches on. He's one of those players that might not play well with his club, but with his national team, he turns it on. Everybody says, why is he playing for his club? And then you realize why he's not playing for his club. When he's on, he's on. Which ends up making it even more disappointing in all of this. When you hear and you see James Rodriguez and you see the talent that he has and you see what he was capable of doing, and you see that, of course, I don't want to make it a sob story about one player, but each time he ends up making a spectacular pass, you're like, oh my God, what could he have done? Imagine if he had his head placed right, what he could have done. Call me whatever you want, okay? On this one, I'll let you call me whatever. I'll let you insult me. I'll let you say whatever. You can, whatever, do this. If he had his head screwed on right, he might have been alongside Messi. He could have been alongside Ronaldo. He could have been, I don't know about alongside, but we would have been talking about those two, and he's right there. That's how one sees the talent that he has. If he would have done all of that, everything that those two did, if he did 1/100th of what those guys did, he might not be here. He might be here. Okay? He might be here. He's right there. That's the ceiling. He's hitting that ceiling. That's not a bad ceiling. And if you say, well, okay, he would have been the third best player in the world. Damn. That's some good company. Especially those two. That's some damn good company. Anyone in the world would take being third best in the world under that type of company. And he had the potential for it. So every time, there's times that you see these balls. I mean, the match against Spain, when Daniel Munoz ends up scoring, he's the one that sets up the pass. Remember that goal, the Cuadrado goal against Poland? To me, one of the greatest assists in World Cup history. Assists, I'm talking about. One of the greatest assists. I mean, the way he hits that ball and just hits it right on a dime, and Cuadrado's coming full speed ahead. If you check it out, check out that goal, and you just absolutely are in awe of what he's capable of doing. But he was never capable of doing it consistently. If he's on, Colombia could be damn dangerous. I don't know. Maybe the motivation's there. Maybe the motivation comes and goes. Maybe, but if it is there, God help everybody. Because it could be a very entertaining World Cup. It could be a very entertaining Copa America. It could be a very entertaining World Cup qualifier seeing Colombia play if he's on. But I don't know. Let me continue. Another guy that ends up being probably the most consistent of all Colombian players, Lucho Diaz. Lucho Diaz coming in alongside Santos Borré, alongside John Cordova, alongside Juanfer Quintero. So, I mean, the cavalcade of talent that Colombia have up top is gross. It's just disgusting what they have. But we saw, I don't know if the same talent, but very similar talent, and a lot of the same faces in that leading up to the 2022 World Cup. That's why you end up seeing some people that end up being so apprehensive when it comes to talking about Colombia and saying, well, maybe they could. Maybe. But Colombia end up being that very dangerous side that could really cause a lot of problems for a team like the U.S. Keep in mind, if I'm not mistaken, they have a good chance of crossing paths if they both get out of the group stage, depending on how things fall out. So we'll see. Again, Colombia's biggest obstacle is themselves. Is in crucial moments how they behave, how they comport, how they react, how they see things. And for a team like Colombia, being able to have their head on right could see them get very deep, could see them even contending. And many do talk about of course, the first team that they mention right now is Uruguay. The second one, they kind of hesitate, but they say Brazil because of their pedigree. The third one they probably mention ends up being Colombia, but kind of a distant third in terms of those. I'm not in disagreement and it can even be closer. And maybe Colombia closed the gap on Brazil, knowing how they did in World Cup qualifiers. But again, we have to see what Dorival Jr.'s impact ends up being with Brazil, with the Brazilian national team when he has to play for all the marble. Of course, tonight they end up playing Mexico, and that could tell us something. It could absolutely tell us nothing, and Mexico could be getting a new coach. Of course, I had a video about that, so you guys want to check it out, you can do so as well. So again, I'm just giving you a lowdown of what Colombia could offer. And when it comes to at least my projected lineup for Colombia today, I should say, because I'm forgetting. Let me see. Actually, give me a second. I'm going to check out what they have. And I might disagree with what Colombia is going to have. I would think... well, okay. Well, for the most part, I agree. You know what? I do agree. Because it would be Camilo Vargas, Muñoz, well, not... No. I don't know. Maybe, okay, well, yeah, it'll be Vargas, Muñoz, Lucumí, Mujica at left back. Davinson Sanchez, I'm not sure about that one. We'll see. Lerma and Richard Rios, they'll be the two holding midfielders. You know, I don't agree wholeheartedly with the defense. Lerma, Richard Rios, James, John Arias, Lucho Diaz, so 4-2-3-1, with Santos Borré up top, the man from Internacional, of course. Played over Eintracht Frankfurt, played over at Wolfsburg, the former River Plate man. That ends up really creating some interesting situations. Of course, let me see. Hold on. I don't agree with Davinson. Well, yeah. This is more like, yeah, to me, it was more Jerry Mina than Davinson Sanchez. So it would be Vargas, Muñoz, Mina, Lucumí, Mujica, back line of four from right to left. Lerma and Richard Rios. Lerma, Richard Rios. Although some say Mateus Uribe, to me, Richard Rios has to play. Although against the U.S. it could be a little bit more different because you might have Mateus Uribe who ends up being a bit more defensive-minded. He's not going to rush up the pitches as much. Maybe ends up being interesting to see in that position. Arias, James, Lucho Diaz. Of course, inverted for you guys. I'll do your. It would be Arias, James, Lucho Diaz. And finally, of course, it's either going to be it's one of two two River Plate players, one former, one present. One would end up being either Borré, or the other one ends up being Miguel Angel Borja. If it's Borré, you're going to see a lot more dropping back and moving around. If it's Borja, it'll be interesting against the U.S. defenders because he's very physical. He understands how to poach inside of the area. He understands how to get the ball and be able to associate with others and let that ball go to the players out wide. And, of course, anybody coming in and playing the second ball very well. Borré, basically the same thing. And keep in mind, Borré, one of the all-time leading goal scorers for River Plate as a foreigner. Borja hot on his tail. But both have had some different styles and different qualities. But again, Borja ends up being more in the middle. Borré can play out wide, come back into the middle, associate with James, come back and basically hide himself. There's a player that can come in front. He can end up overlap. He can have a lot more movement compared to Borja. Although it's not that Borja is just immobile in the middle of the pitch and just ends up having the ball bounce off of him and it goes in or it goes to a player. No, he does a great deal of work as well. So the amount of talent that Colombia have, it's nothing to shake a stick at. So to me, it'll be interesting to see exactly what they're able to do. So just wanted to do this real quick. And again, if you have any questions, leave them in your comments. Make sure that you leave them wherever you want. And we'll see what ends up happening with Colombia because they have potential to do big things. We'll see how they do. All right, guys. Talk to you soon. Ciao.